I was really busy last week and woke up one morning and decided I was going to finish framing the outdoor kitchen cover no matter what. I say that because there are things in my garden that now need attention. So I attacked the kitchen cover with new determination. During the last video, I got the rafters up and was prepared to put in the hurricane ties. But then I realized that in the scheme of things, I needed to get the frame finished, and then I could put in the ties. So, off to the workshop to cut some leftover lumber from 2x6s into 2x3s to use as inside rafter braces. That didn't take long, and in no time I had my pile ready to install. The weather had turned cooler, so of course Sunny Girl supervised in her winter sweater. I decided to install the braces in a staggered pattern of alternating front to back to stagger the press on each brace. That didn't take long, and I was now ready to tackle the job of putting on the facing for the front and back rafter ends that would support the overhang. I figured out my angles, but as you can see, I got confused with the direction of the angle. But how does that saying go? Measure twice, cut once, and I realized my error and marked X's through the wrong line. This part wasn't difficult, but required some angling to get the circular saw in place. Once that was done, I was ready to put in the facing that would support the side overhangs. I was working alone, so throughout this entire process, I had to set up and take down supports that would hold the lumber in place and act as an extra set of hands. It was time-consuming, but allowed me to get things done by myself. You can see here how the supports were worth the effort because they allowed me to clamp the facing in place and then measure the distance for each side of the overhang. But after all of this, I discovered 2 rafters were about 1/8 of an inch too long, preventing the facing to sit flush. And wouldn't you know, they were the 2 rafters that held the supports. So I had to take everything down to cut those rafter ends. I sighed heavily and got her done. Everything in this part of the framing required me to do things twice. Once for the front and then the back. Once for the right side and then the left. So I again put in the supports and reinstalled the facing. And during all of this, I forgot to turn on the camera when I installed the back facing. But trust me, it was done. With the facing in place, I could move on to getting the sides of the overhang installed. Keep in mind the wood was so hard that each screw required a pilot hole, and you know how much I enjoy doing pilot holes. and on to the left side. I will admit, screwing in the last of the front and back overhang sides was a point that seemed pretty far off when I first began this project, and it felt good to know that the framing was finally done. But there was one last thing stopping me putting on the plywood that would make the roof. I had to cut off the tops of the back posts. I was the horse headed for the barn at this point. So, as I was cutting those posts, I kept thinking this was truly the end. After everything was done, I took a walk around the cover and thought about all the things I learned and the trials I had to endure to learn them. All I needed to do now was create supports for the back to slide and nail the plywood on top to make the actual roof. However, with all the putting up and taking down of the supports to hold the lumber in place, I stripped the screw heads and would need to use a screw extractor or a hacksaw to cut off the screws to release the support. But that is a minor task considering what I'd been through. I decided to leave removing the support and adding the plywood for another day, because friends had invited me to our 4th Thanksgiving dinner together, and I only had one day to make a gift for the hostess. This also gave me a chance to highlight the difference between woodworking and carpentry. I wanted to make a small charcuterie tray, so I selected a nice piece of maple and began the process of drawing the curves for the edges. With that done, I sanded over the edges to smooth them out, and then rounded over the sides. I wanted a little finger hole to allow gripping the tray, so I used a Forstner bit to create a hole. And then sanded the inside to remove the rough edges. I then used 240 grit sandpaper to smooth the sides of the hole. And used the same sandpaper to smooth over the top and sides of the tray, making sure to follow the grain. Next, I used a wet cloth to bring up any hairs of wood before a final sanding, and then used a water-based polish sealer. It felt good to get back into my element. No heavy lifting, no circular saws, and no climbing up on ladders. And there you have a finished product. See you next time.